Noah Powers is excused, and Catherine Barton is excused, and I presume Sherry's excused, so we welcome Heather to. So I call it to order. I've asked. It's not on the agenda, but I've asked Jim O'Connor to give us an overview of the latest with the shores, with the PSC, with the FMPA, to give us an overview. He's running about half an hour late, but he will be here. So when he comes in, he has a presentation. As I said, just preliminary, the commission, the Utilities Commission, that you have a document that you had asked for us to read. They had a resolution proposed by the chairman, Mr. Whittall. However, as a result of the meeting, it was entirely put on hold. The reason being was that there are two meetings that Randy Old, who testified, who reported at the commission, that there are two meetings with the FMPA that is fashioning the response to the preliminary audit, that he is going to be involved. And so the suggestion was that until that response is crafted, best see what the results of those meetings are, and then from there make a decision. And at that time, the utility meeting commission and ourselves would likely be asked to make a recommendation based upon whatever that report is.
And those meetings are going to be in the next couple of weeks, correct?
Next week.
Next week.
I think there's two almost back to back to go into the report. But as I said, they spent an hour and a half with Randy Old reporting. Jim was reporting. It was an extensive review of all of the issues involved, and that was the result that put everything on hold until it rolls out. Because just one point, that the most of the major criticism was up until 2008 with the hedging. At that point in time, the FMPA cashiered the existing general manager and hired Nick. So that's going to be part of the response, as I understand it, according to what Jay Kramer said at the commission meeting. So that's why there is some pause to going forward.
Was there any separate? Oh, excuse me.
Just one thing, one point in here, I know it's on hold, but it just sort of confused me. That second sentence in the third paragraph, their request, we request that you appoint one of your fellow council members to be the voting member on FMPA's board. Well, I thought Randy Old was our voting member on that. Isn't he on that?
I'm sorry. This was being proposed to be sent to all of the member cities of the FMPA.
Oh, this is a request some of the other cities.
This was supposed to be sent to them or recommended to the city council to send.
Okay.
And
now I understand it.
And
most of the rest of them do not have elected officials.
That's the problem. One of the problems.
Well, the problem is that this is a very sophisticated, difficult, complex issue, and whether they're elected or not does not give any individual certain expertise in dealing with high finance, hedging, utility meetings, operations of utilities, and so forth.
They may not have more expertise, but if they're accountable to their respective residents voting, they're going to probably check into it a little bit more closely, I would think.
Well, I would presume that whomever is sent that the council of that city is just as concerned for their
Right.
constituents as their representative. But I don't want to get into that because that was one of the recommendations. As I said, we will see how it. And indeed, only 13% of the representatives on the board, the 31-member board of the FMPA, are elected representatives. And that was a concern, Dan, as
I know
it
it
was
was, Bill.
reported.
I don't remember, I read the report, but I don't remember if the misdeeds, whether hedging and others, and the
Speculation.
well, and the expenditures of money at hotel and all, was that can you say that was pre-2008 and it was improved after 2008?
Well,
Or was that going on throughout?
they're going to have to answer it, but the major losses were by the previous leadership on the hedging.
They were instigated by the previous leadership, yes.
And in fact, contracts were signed by the previous one.
That's
So,
what I gathered,
But
yes.
the loose spending policies and all of that,
the 256 for a retirement dinner and the 1,000 for the rental of the Christmas tree. I really want.
That's not major items to be,
Well, it's highlighted in the report.
I know it's highlighted, but the reality is we're looking for big bucks,
Yeah.
not for
that
$1,000
reflects
meals.
an atmosphere
I know.
of lazy management.
You're absolutely right.
Appeasing his employees.
Right.
But that doesn't get into the domain of the $2 billion of debt.
Correct.
And the $240 million
Exactly.
Exactly.
of
Right.
bad business.
You're right.
And the
Yeah.
decisions that were made that triggered those decisions were not the existing, as I understand it, the existing management team.
I still think there's an awful lot of confusion about the situation, who started it and who could have stopped it, and those type of issues. So.
And this issue, in fact, has been highlighted by the City Council, by the Utilities Commission, and by ourselves. These are fully known, the losses on the hedging and the swaps.
Right.
So a lot of this is looking in the rearview mirror. Now, to be sure, some of the management controls appear they're going to have to fix, obviously, in terms of accountability. But as you're mentioning, I really want to pause to see what the results and if they have done anything.
It would be interesting to see all the misdeeds put on a chart with dates beside them.
Yeah.
That would turn a lot of lights on.
Well, and I said the evidently. I don't want to say anymore. I just want to be cynic enough or skeptical enough to see results and explanations, if there are any. But there was certainly evidence of apparently of looser controls than you'd expect, and there were obviously bad business decisions, but no malfeasance or illegal operations. Now, as Cindy has pointed out, an operations audit is different than a financial audit. And if you just explain the difference, please.
There is some overlap, but a financial audit like the kind we get annually for our CAFR is focused on making sure that your procedures and internal controls do not lead you to any material misstatement of your financial position. The place where they get involved in compliance with laws and regulations and policies and procedures, because they do, is relative, again, to misstatements of your financial position, as well as the possibility that you're not in compliance with grant agreements. But in terms of second-guessing your business decisions, if you will, that's not something that financial auditors typically get involved in. So I've heard lots of talk back and forth. For instance, financial auditors do very much care about your travel expense policies and whether you follow them. So even though that may not be material, it matters to them in terms of compliance, and that is an internal control that matters to them. But in terms of business decisions, they typically don't get involved in them unless you're not stating them properly on the financial statements.
I think
There were a couple of, according to that audit report, there were, I think the first 2 points described certain practices of FMPA that did not conform to industry practice and procedures. I think that was a phrase I heard. One was their hedging policies. And I'm just wondering if you're familiar enough with these power contracts. I am not, because they're thick. But are there hedging policies and their general practices? Is that outlined in those contracts? Are there standards outlined?
I don't know the answer to that. Certainly, if more specifics with regard to FMPA and those contracts, when Mr. O'Connor is here, he may know. But I haven't reviewed those contracts with an eye towards that. But an operational audit is what the auditor. The operational audit is what the Auditor General did. So
Yes.
they obviously reviewed it in light of the business decision making and not just the financials.
Seems to me, though, the glaring issue is you have a 35-member board, which makes it really big to handle. It's almost operationally impossible to get a 35-member board to work together in harmony. It's hard to do. Secondly, I hate to say it, but again, the Sunshine Law ties up everybody's hands. I mean, it's not as if they can talk amongst themselves to get up to speed or have meetings elsewhere so they can raise issues. So here again, the Sunshine Law ties up everything. And even, how does our representative have time to coerce and pull together a team within 35 that can assert an influence over the 35? Because the Sunshine Law is shutting him down. I don't know how that effectively gets done, even amongst ourselves. You and I, sitting here, 5 members. Sometimes there are issues that people don't quite understand. Maybe I don't quite understand. And yet we can't sit down amongst ourselves and say, what the heck is this issue? Let's talk about it. Because it's all on television and everybody is worried about what they're saying, particularly when you have conflicting positions. Nobody wants to say anything that could jeopardize a lawsuit or undermine management that is moving ahead. So the Sunshine Law has benefits, but it definitely has constriction. I don't know how. I mean, when you try to assert influence on that board, Randy Olds has a huge job to try to make that work. What we need is within that 35 is 7 or 8 additional people that can bring enough force to make it happen. Or you got to step out of the Sunshine Law and do it outside of the board members that are on there.
Staff people. No.
Right?
Right. Well, and the other issue, you said 35.
35.
Not only is it cumbersome, but the city of Havana has 7,000 customers and 1 vote.
Right.
Kissimmee has 100,000 customers and 1 vote. So the
thing is, it works.
It's cumbersome. It's an awkward arrangement, as you're suggesting.
It works for management, let's be honest about it. It works for management. It doesn't work for the public. It just doesn't work. So how you get around that, I think that's going to be the bigger issue.
And I think that is some of the directions of the whole structure of governance, both of the management of FMPA and their operations, as well as the board, is where some of this focus is beginning to congeal around and say, it doesn't work as it is constructed.
Yes, it does. It flat doesn't work. It's a dysfunctional board, and everybody wants to vote and no city wants to get off, but a lot of cities aren't. It's not a big deal to them. If you're a city with 7,000, and if your rates are reasonably close to where others are,
And you don't have an electric utility or management.
so you're not going to fight about it. You're just going to go along, right?
Right. With one vote.
With one vote.
It's same as Vero Beach.
Yeah.
That has a power plant.
Yeah. So it's a big deal how we work it out.
At least we had a few minutes, and Dan, when all of us, when Jim comes, any questions that
Okay,
you could give us some guidance on.
That'd be nice.
Well, with that, approval of the minutes.
I'll make a motion for approval of the minutes.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Public comment? I see no public comment. Chairman's matters. I think I perhaps covered those at the moment. I did ask. Yeah, I
Didn't
did.
waste any time.
I did ask on the finance director's matters that an item which is really keen for all of us is to discuss the performance of the pension trust funds, what the trajectory is, and what the potential outlook is, just as an overview for last year as well as so far, how it looks this year.
Peter, may I ask a question?
Sure.
What responsibility do we have as it relates to the performance and the management of the pension plan?
We have
Do we
been-
delegate that to the city manager, or
Actually, that
who
there is a
who
pension.
has the oversight?
There is a pension committee that was
there is?
established by resolution.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And so that committee has oversight over the investments, investment choices, and administration of the plan
But we
by
don't-
resolution. You're not that. No,
We
that
don't have any
no.
responsibility or authority over that pension commission.
No.
They do it all, and all
Correct.
we do is look at it and
Yeah. And ultimately, anything related to the pension is the responsibility of the council. So the only place where the Finance Commission comes in is if you have recommendations regarding pensions as a whole that you'd like to make to the city council, that they were the ones that adopted the resolution that established the pension committee. But the pension committee itself is made up of the city manager, myself, the city attorney, the city clerk, and the human resources director. And we meet quarterly. So.
But we are charged with making independent recommendations to the city council on matters affecting the pension and their activities. So that is the role that we're charged with. We are not the decision makers in terms of resolutions or ordinances or direction, but recommendations we do make and have made.
Yeah, and to that matter, I mean, if you raised it, I didn't realize it was on the agenda today, but since you raised it, I reviewed the last results pretty carefully. And my overview review suggests that they haven't been performing even at the averages of their measurement tools. And if you look at, and the other thing I looked at, I mean, we're carrying our pension funds at I'm talking about our pension fund valuations at a 7.5% return, and yet over the last 10 years, our return has been about 5.9.
But improved since then.
But it's improved. Yeah, it's improved by not necessarily performance, but Federal Reserve driving money costs down.
Sure.
And pumping the stock market.
Do we want to have this conversation now, or do you want
Yeah,
me to
why don't
address it
we
under
just-
my matters?
I mean, since you brought it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's cover this first then.
It-
as long as we're-
A couple of things relative to the pension trust funds.
I don't have that.
The first thing is that the pension committee adopted about 5 months ago a revised, updated investment policy statement, and that investment policy statement has specific performance requirements with regard to each of the investments in terms of what quartile it has to perform in, and what the returns have to be relative to an established benchmark. In the case of our investment policy statement, all of those benchmarks, if you will, are in the 3-year, 5-year range, not in the short term. And at this point in time, as of this quarter, every one of our investments is performing to the investment policy statement standards with the exception of one. And that is only a little bit off the mark, and we're going to keep an eye on it to see if it comes up to snuff in the next
Now, Cindy,
quarter.
that's not part of this report, right?
No, I don't think you have
So
the
we
big
don't-
report. Do you get the big one, or did you get the little one?
We got the little one.
Okay, then that's what I'll do, is
So we
share the
haven't-
big one with
all
you.
we've seen is this one.
We didn't, yeah, and I downloaded it and I didn't get the colors.
Right.
So I
So-
couldn't tell which line was which line.
Why don't we get copies to the commission of the big report?
We can, but again, I'll find the right page for you.
We need to see the new policies.
And I can get you a copy of the investment policy statement
Yeah,
as
if we've
well.
changed them, then that's, like,
Actually, what we did was establish one where there really was sort of a haphazard.
all I was going by with this. And
Yeah, there was
and
sort of
looking
a-
at the 10-year performance.
There was sort of a haphazard one before, so what we did was adopt one that's compliant with Florida statutes and that clearly spells out what we're willing to invest in. At the same time, we changed our investment mix a little bit, added some things like real estate in small concentrations, and then also established benchmarks, et cetera, for each of the funds. And there's a page in here that shows investment performance relative to the benchmarks within the IPS that you don't have. So
Okay, all I was looking at is this one right here.
right.
And it gives benchmarks for every manager.
No, it gives benchmarks for each category. Large cap, real estate, et cetera. Yeah, there's a benchmark for each category. And without flipping through here and trying to go back through it. But anyway, the presentation that we had at our last meeting by Prudential is that we've got one category where we're not making the required performance standard, and that's only off a little bit in the 3-year and fine in the 5-year. So we're going to keep an eye on that particular one and rebalance our investments if it continues to fall below our expectation. As far as the percentage that we are currently using as our valuation percentage. Again, at this point, given that a pension plan looks to the 20 and 30-year performance mark and not the 1, 2, 3-year mark, the board is content at this point with the 7 3/4% because we know that there is a change coming, and that is this. If the total freeze of the pension plan that has currently been voted on by the City Council as their response to the impasse with the unions comes to pass, and we full stop freeze the defined benefit plan, not only for new entrants, but for all the people that are currently within the plan, we have to go back and revise our actuarial assumptions and actually redo our investment mix because we no longer have a robust plan. We no longer have a plan that's getting any new contributions into it. It's purely going to live now on investments, and those investments have to be a bit more conservative, and so we know that's going to drive down our returns. And so knowing that was coming, one, being not completely, the board doesn't have a problem with the 7 3/4. That's what FRS is using for the long term. That seems reasonable to us, but we know we have to adjust it anyway. And so rather than undertake that for the current valuation, we're going to do that in conjunction with our activities to freeze the plan.
Yeah, because if the reality is we're well under 7.5%, then our valuations are out of skew a little more.
But our valuations are a 20 to 30-year time frame. And again, the board is content that 7 3/4 is reasonable in that time frame for now. But we have to look at it again anyway, so we're going to do it in conjunction with the freeze, and that way all the changes can happen at once instead of changing this and then changing that and have the numbers go like this. Because
and
the
when we
freeze
do
is
that,
substantial.
Cindy, Prudential has been our investment advisor for years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to relook at who our investment advisor also or not? Or are we sticking with Prudential?
At this point in time, the board is content with Prudential and doesn't have any intention of going out to bid. And we've had that discussion. again, once we full stop freeze it, really the key is not just investment management, but some of the administration. I mean, they do the payments and the administration as well. So there's a piece of that as well that they're going to take on a bit more of it for us to relieve staff of some of its requirements at no additional charge. And that's something we've been discussing with them as a part of the freeze, is putting a little more of the administrative burden on them and less on staff, as we've lost staff members in HR. And so at this point in time, with that proposal that they've made to us and with the performance that we've had out of them, we don't have any intention of changing investment advisors.
Yeah. I mean, no disrespect, but again, we got a committee represented almost entirely by the staff. Is there one member outside, two members?
The committee is represented almost entirely by people who are in the pension plan,
right.
And that is very typical. That's exactly how pension committees are supposed to work. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the investment policy statement, one of the requirements that our attorney has explained to us is that when we sit as a pension committee, our first and foremost responsibility is to the pension beneficiaries and the recipients of the pension plan, and not to any outside entity. So if you look at the police pension board, same thing. It's comprised of police officers or people that are part of the retirement system almost exclusively, and that's the function of a pension committee. Now, certainly the council has ultimate oversight over the pension, and when it comes to things like changing benefits or freezing benefits or the kinds of things we're talking about, that's completely within their purview. But the pension committee, as constructed, is pretty typical of a pension committee. I mean, it's there to
there's a lot of group
within parameters.
There's a lot of group thinking going on. That's all I can tell you. And I'm not sure that's the benefit of the employees.
With all due respect, I don't think that there is. I mean,
well, maybe.
And I will tell you this: if the fact of the matter is that there was no pension committee at all for many, many years.
I know.
And so the kind of quarterly meetings, adopted investment policy statements with accountability and benchmarks, the interpretation of some of the pension benefits that have come before the board because there's question marks in the minds of employees, working on the documents for the freeze. Those are all things that never took place before in the sunshine. It was a committee of one. And so I would submit to you that there's a lot less groupthink and a lot more in the sunshine, legal, well-considered administration of the pension plan than there ever has been.
Well, I'm thankful for that. I'm just observing what's gone on over the last several years, and the employees need the best direction they could possibly get, and so does the city, because the city has the ultimate responsibility if the pension funds don't work. All I'm suggesting is that we've all benefited over the last 4 or 5 years by Federal Reserve manipulation of the stock market, and it showed up in our returns. I suspect if we melded out some of those returns over the last few years, we would have a lot less benefit showing up in those returns. So.
But at the end of the day, that is the actual market value of our assets. And so,
I understand that. I do.
Yeah. I mean, again, at the end of the day, at this point in time, based on what Council has voted, the transition of the management of this pension plan is substantial in that now it becomes not a going concern, not a robust plan, not a plan that gets any new benefits into it whatsoever. It becomes a plan that has to live on its investments and hit the target of meeting all of the obligations, but as the last retiree passes away. And so we have to freeze it, and then after we freeze it, sit with our actuary who's going to do an impact statement before we do, as well as our investment advisors, and figure out a brand new strategy, if you will, because it becomes a completely different kind of pension plan. Right. And so rather than make a bunch of changes sort of disjointedly, knowing that was coming, we've made a conscious decision to freeze the plan and then reset and move forward on the basis of the new management approach to a plan that's no longer an
I just wanted to work for both the employees and the city. And if it gets good guidance, that's what we need. So if you're doing it, I'm thankful for that.
And again, what's under the purview of the council and what's taken place is, I would submit to you, the absolute most extreme form of pension reform. It's a full stop freeze. No new entrants, to existing employees, no more growth in the liability, the end, stop. You can't have a more expansive, extensive pension reform than that. That's as good as it gets in terms of reducing the liability and beginning to fill the gap. I will tell you, too, I won't have the final until probably want to say Monday, and then when I have it, I'll forward it to the committee. But our actuarial evaluation for this year, even in conjunction with the changes for GASB 67, 68, has shown some improvement in our funded position that I think both on an actuarial and a market value basis, that will be good news for our CAFR.
Good.
So.
Okay.
Well, and I'd like to point out, I've sat in at a number of the pension board meetings of the police. And the police fund has done better
Yeah, it has.
but I was very impressed about how effective the board was and how responsive the advisors in the investment group was sitting through. And as I said, it was a public meeting, so I was favorably impressed with their proceedings and obviously their results.
And that's essentially what we're doing with the GE Pension Board now as well. We have an attorney. We have regular conferences with our investment advisors. We have changed our investment mix, to rethink and start doing some of the things the police board is doing. I mean, we've moved in that direction, and we have those kinds of public meetings as well, which I would invite any of you to attend. And Mr. Brevant has come to some of those meetings. So,
Go ahead.
I should know the answer, but is this freeze a permanent freeze that cannot ever be unfrozen?
I don't know that it can't be, but I doubt that it ever will be.
But you could
That's
have
probably
a
the best way
different
of
city
putting it.
council and
It would take a city council to unfreeze it.
right, but we have different city councils all the time.
We do.
Okay, so it could be unfrozen.
Technically, I believe that it could or reconstituted in a different way. I've seen DC plans frozen and unfrozen, or people come and go. Certainly, it would be complex to do. I don't think that would be outside the realm of possibility legally and administratively, but realistically, I doubt that it would be reconstituted.
All plans have profit elements and hedge elements. This year you are moving $2.3 million from the profit elements to the hedge element. Be aware that that costs you $500,000. Because they're going from almost 20% profit down to loss universally.
And again, I'm not sure what you're making reference to. I mean, there is some rebalancing to hit the asset mix that we recently adopted in our long-term strategy.
What happens is you have hedge elements, which are known elements of stability and not profit. And if you keep moving your most profitable funds, which grow every year, into the elements that shrink every year because they're not profitable, that keeps a balance, but that costs money. And I extended the numbers. You moved $2.3 million this year, and if you left them in the profit elements instead of moving them to the hedge elements, you would have made another $400,000 to $700,000, depending on which rate of return you look at, by leaving them where they are.
And certainly, I'd be happy to look at the specifics with you, outside this meeting. Again, I'd love to look at your
I can
numbers
give
if you
that
want
to
to
you,
talk
yeah.
about them. Sure, we can
give that
talk
to
with
you,
our investment
yeah.
advisors about them.
Now, it disturbs the stability because it removes the hedge elements, because they will constantly try to become smaller, and the ones that are profitable will constantly grow on the pie chart. So it's a natural thing, but that costs money.
Vic, why don't you get together offline with Cindy, unless
Sure.
to really,
It's just simple.
since you've
Yeah.
done the analysis, and perhaps come back and revisit it after you and Cindy have had some discussion. Fair enough, everyone? Cindy?
Is there anything else with
Any
regard to
other
the pension
questions
plans
on
that
the
we want to?
pension? But I think the bottom line is that unlike the ice bath we got last year on the pension valuation, you're suggesting, Cindy, that it might be somewhat more favorable this year.
The preliminary results I saw are that the cash outflow, the funding outflow, would be a little bit more favorable, not substantial, but better. But that the funded position, both on a market value and an actuarial value basis, is improved considerably.
Yeah.
And so the unfunded liability has shrunk again, on both, again, a market value and an actuarial value basis. And that helps. You know, one of the things that we haven't talked about a lot because it's another year away, but as we finalize the 14-15 CAFR, this is the year that GASB is going to require us to place the entire unfunded liability of the pension fund on our government-wide balance sheet. So certainly this year's results, plus hopefully, you know, good results for next year, will mean that when we put that number on our balance sheet, it won't be $37 million. You know, hopefully it'll come down substantially before that happens. This is also the first actuarial valuation that includes the GASB. It's the transitional year, so it includes the GASB 67 numbers, where you have other tables showing funding progression and a little bit more market value stuff, as well as actuarial value stuff that I think you might find interesting relative to the pension fund as well.
And that's entirely different from the workshop we're going to have on the other post-retirement.
Correct.
You want to talk about that now, too? Take them all out of order if you want. I had that on my list. The OPEB meeting. I have the minutes. I apologize for not being here at the last meeting. The minutes indicated that for the meeting on the 26th with Jim Rizzo from Gabriel Roeder Smith, who is our OPEB actuary, who's also a great resource for other post-employment benefits in general, trust funds, liabilities, very, very knowledgeable, that you had expected backup material 2 weeks in advance of the meeting. I wasn't here that day. I wouldn't have promised that to you because at this point they are still finalizing the roll forward for the current fiscal year that we're auditing, and will not be able to produce the funding letter and those documents till after that's finished. It's probably going to be toward the end of next week, not 2 weeks from the meeting, which is today. So if you still want to have the meeting on the basis of having information a few days beforehand and not 2 weeks beforehand, we can. Let me say this about it, though. You'll get the roll forward letter. Even if he gave you his entire briefing package, this is a complicated topic, and you're going to gain more from your discussion with him and your back and forth with him in the workshop than you're going to from your review of the materials in advance. I would just submit that to you because he'll be here, he can answer your questions, it'll very much be a workshop format, a lot of back and forth, and so even if you have the handout in advance, in the absence of being able to converse with him about it, it's probably not going to be incredibly useful to you.
I would prefer to have the meeting as scheduled.
And we'll get you what we can next week.
Sooner rather than later, because we have other meetings that we're going to be obligated to have a special call. So I would prefer to have a date certain and then be there.
And then if you don't get all your questions answered, we can have more meetings on the topic. Remember, our goal here was to look at the most current results for this last fiscal year, and then to start talking about ways to mitigate that liability before it has to go on the books completely, including establishing a trust fund and funding that trust fund. And the ultimate schedule driver for all that is if you're going to recommend to council that they fund a trust fund for the OPEB, we need to include that in next summer's budget or this summer's budget activity. So basically, March, April, May, we have a little time for you to discuss it and formulate a recommendation to council so that recommendation can be included in our budget planning for 15-16. It's too late for us to do anything about 14-15 because the numbers that would be required to fund this are big enough that we can't absorb them within a budget amendment for this current fiscal year. So I think if you want to go ahead and have this meeting, I'll get you what I have next week. Then if you need more meetings or more conversation, you've got a couple of months to formulate a recommendation to council and to put the numbers together for the budget.
Hugh and Vic, that is the kind of recommendation that the council would be looking for us to forward to them, as well as whatever comes out of the discussions on the pension. So we do indeed have a role in the process, and hopefully get in front of the process, as opposed in the past sometimes having to play catch up. And what we're going to go into next actually is some of the review of past results, as opposed to what we've just been speaking to in terms of a forward-looking, proactive role.
So am I hearing it's okay? We'll keep that meeting on the 26th. I'll give you what I can next week, and we'll treat that as the first step in kind of an ongoing initiative that will culminate in a recommendation to council for budget on OPEB. I will tell you this. I hate to be a Pollyanna today, but what I'm told by my OPEB actuary is that one of the actions that the city took just prior to the end of last fiscal year has had a very substantial positive impact on our overall OPEB liability. One of our pieces of health insurance, retiree health insurance reform that resulted in a whole bunch of our retirees shifting from the city plan to Medicare supplement plans has had a big, big impact on our liability in a good way. So I think when you see those numbers next week, we'll have something that's going to be much more palatable in terms of creating a trust fund and funding it than it might have been when the number was substantially higher. So there should be a good outcome there.
Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, my wife put me out of town on the 26th.
Oh, no.
I didn't hear you.
Oh, Hope scheduled me out of town on the 26th.
Oh boy.
I mean, they did offer us some other dates. I know this was something that you're extremely.
Well,
this meeting was your impetus.
Well,
so
I know
I've been a noisy guy about it.
No, you've been carrying the banner on it. So,
right. I mean, we have some time, and so if in deference to Mr. Brevant, we want to reschedule, we can do that. I mean, we have some time before it becomes a budget issue.
I know we really need to get it done, but I'm really out of time.
No, I
can't.
really would
My wife.
want you to be there because Glenn has been pursuing this for some months now, and I think that it's culminating in this meeting. So
Yeah, I really want to be there. Right.
Yeah, I would definitely like to have you there as well.
Would it work with you guys scheduling a week out after that or week back?
I need to check back with the OPEB actuary. They gave me 3 dates, and I forwarded them to you, and I don't know if those 3 dates are still available for them. So
if
you give me some dates, that might work better. Pick a couple of dates yourself, and let me see if I can get them
Yeah,
scheduled.
why
for
don't
them.
you
Work with, I can work
get
with
us a
Sherry.
schedule?
Okay.
Right. Maybe. I hate to do that to you guys, but
Gives us more time to study.
yeah, I think the studying is helpful, particularly when you bring up items like you did there. That's positive, right? So, if you can, okay.
So we'll see what we can do to reschedule that for soon, but not February 26th.
What's that?
Soon, but not February 26th.
Yeah,
and how long are you going to be gone, sir?
I'm coming back Saturday morning.
Oh, okay. No, we're not going to do it on Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, yeah.
All right.
Well, I will say this. There is one more while I guess we're on Finance Directors Matters. There is one more meeting that I need to ask you to think about as well, and that is our rate consultant is ready to discuss with both the Utility Commission and you the preliminary results of their rate study. And so they are meeting with the Utility Commission on the morning of March the 17th. What I was going to suggest is, if it works for you, it would be nice if they could meet with you on the afternoon of March the 17th. However, I'm not suggesting you combine that with this OPEB meeting, because those are two very meaty topics, and I don't think you want to try to sit in here for that long.
What day of the week is that?
That's a Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday.
Now, I will say this. I want to make, particularly since we have a couple of new members, I want to make sure everyone's clear that there's a huge difference between this rate study, which is just about rate sufficiency and rate structure for the status quo of this utility, and the optimization study that may produce some rate reductions. The rate consultant was not looking for rate reductions. They were looking at rate structure, cost of service, rate sufficiency. Their role in rate reductions will be after the optimization study is done. They'll have the model together that will allow them to take those cost reductions, pump them through the model, and tell us how it affects rates. So they're going to have a role in the optimization, but they are not the optimization consultant. So there's a totally separate firm that's looking at cost reductions, and also Mr. Wright, our attorney, is looking at renegotiating contracts. That's all a different initiative than the initial part of this rate study. So just so we're clear, it's not going to be an optimization report.
And as we've discussed before, one of the big issues is that we have a significant break point in kilowatt hour charges up to 1,000 and over 1,000. in a two-tiered rate, and that's one of the issues because it goes from 4 dot something cents to 7 dot something cents if you break the 1,000. So that is one of the key features that they're looking at in terms. And I believe that, for example, Florida Power Line, I think, has a 3-tiered at 1,000, at 1,500, or whatever. So that is just one element of putting that, as Cindy says, put that model together, and then when they do the optimization, run the demographic data or the billing data through to see how that new rate structure would impact the overall and so forth.
They've had the chance to do some good, sophisticated analysis of our billing data, and they've got some interesting data to present regarding, average usage by different customer classes and some of those things. So I think it's going to be an interesting meeting for everyone. But I just want to make sure no one's coming expecting a conversation about, OUC contracts or closing the power plants or any of that. That's not really the focus of the rate study. So
we want to schedule a meeting on the 17th.
if we can, because I know it's short notice. So if you can't, they can come at a different time. But
I'm for it.
you have to be out of here by 4 o'clock, I'm told by the clerk's office, because it's a city council meeting day. So if you want to make it 1:30 instead of 2, that might be good.
That's fine, if it's all right with the other
That would
members.
help me a lot,
1:30.
because I have an evening meeting as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you make a motion to have the meeting on the 17th, special call for specifically for the rate study.
I'll second it.
In favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
So now we're going into history, Cindy?
Bet. The quarterly financial reports, let's start with those. I think that's the first item on your agenda. You should have all received, hopefully, a hard copy of both the quarterly financial report for the first quarter of this fiscal year, as well as the quarterly variance analysis, which is a smaller, little stapled together report. Just particularly for the new members of the commission, let me review what triggers a variance analysis for the finance department. And that is, it's some item that has, first, a budget versus actuals variance of more than 10% of the pro rata year to date. So a quarter of the way through the year, any line item that's under 15% or over 35%, that would be the first criteria for us to look at it for an analysis of the reason for the variance. In conjunction with that, it has to be a line item that's bigger than $70,000, because that way we don't spend a lot of time, analyzing variances for tiny things that don't really have a big impact at the bottom line. There are a number of things within our budget that have built-in variances that are normal and never change. Example, on page 1 of your variance analysis, the very first item at the top, ad valorem taxes. We take in almost all of that tax revenue between November and April because of the timing of the tax bills. And so you will never see this line item matching up to the pro rata year to date. It will always have a variance, and yet that variance is within what we consider normal parameters. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that variance. That's what we expect. And so those items that are variances, but that are normal variances, are labeled as such with the phrase variance within normal parameters. And there's lots of those within here. Insurance is another example. Some insurance premiums, we pay the whole premium at the beginning of the year, and therefore in the first quarter you see 100 or % or so. We pay some insurance premiums quarterly, and so at the end of the second quarter, you'll see both the first and second quarter payments have already been made, and therefore you'll see a big variance. So not everything, as a matter of fact, not many things within the city's budget are strictly on a pro rata basis, and that does tend, in some cases, to produce variances that, although we put them in the analysis, we're not concerned about them because we expect to see them. And so that's that. It's the first quarter, so there's nothing really completely out of whack at this point. Normal variances, a few places where we had journal entries that didn't get made before the end of the first quarter due to Javier and I working hard on the CAFR, and those will catch up in the second quarter. A little bit of underruns in personnel in the electric utility because of some turnover in T&D. And other than that, nothing I considered really of note, although I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Within the financial report, the one thing I did want to point out was on page, I should have tagged this. Page 32, which is a quarterly balance sheet for the electric utility. As of the end of the first quarter, the total cash balance was about $27 million, and the unrestricted cash and investments of about 15.5 is down to about 71 days of unrestricted cash on hand. As you recall, we had around 90 at the end of last year. This 71 is nothing to be alarmed about. It's normal for the first quarter. We make our whole debt service payment of principal and interest in the first quarter of the fiscal year, which is almost $6 million in cash. And so our cash at the end of the first quarter of each year is always down because we've made that big debt service payment. By the time we get to the end of the second quarter, it should be back up in the 80 to 90 range where we'd like to see it. So I just thought I'd point that out, that even though that's low, that's not unexpected and will rebuild itself over the coming quarter. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about this report or the variance analysis. Otherwise, it's pretty non-exciting in the first quarter.
Cindy, I had a couple
Sure.
questions here. And again, it has to do with insurance. It may be a moot point. Workman's comp, it looks like we budgeted 108, and if you use the first two quarters, we're going to be around 125. Have we got a seasonality in the payroll in the second and the third quarter?
There's actually a couple things going on there. First, it's that we've made two quarterly payments.
Yeah, right.
So part of that workers' comp line item is just the quarterly payments to FMIT. But the other thing that's going on is, you remember maybe 2 years ago, we went from self-insured workers' comp to fully insured workers' comp. And instead of the city carrying all of its workers' comp costs directly within a self-insurance fund with a reinsurer, we actually went with the league. And now we make quarterly payments to the league. And we have to pay our deductibles for each case. And so we had no real experience to go on for me to budget the deductibles part of this. So now we're getting around 2 years worth of experience, and hopefully when I do budget this summer, I'll have a pretty good average for what each fund is shelling out each year in deductible expenses, as well as the premiums.
So we may want to adjust next year's budget up a little bit.
Now that I have enough data to do it with. So yeah, this will probably come in a little bit over. I don't expect it to be so bad that it'll throw the entire budget out of whack, but yeah, you're right, that it will come in a little bit over, and that's my deductibles.
I noted too that on our general insurance, we budget about $1 million, and based on the first two quarters, we're probably on an annualized basis running $750,000 to $800,000. Are we a little over budget there, maybe?
Which one are we looking at?
That'd be line 34501, general insurance, the second page.
On the second page.
Could we have a little softness there, maybe?
Yes, it looks like that we do. The other thing that happens to us, too, though, to keep in mind, is in the first quarter of the year is typically when we get our return of premium. And so our annual budget is based on 4 quarterly payments minus the Florida League return of premium.
So the credit shows up
in the first quarter.
Shows up in that first quarter, so... Okay, so we probably understated the reality, understated the cost because of the way that thing works.
Exactly. Okay. So we've made our total budget for the year is the 4 quarterly payments minus the return of premium. But in the first quarter, we've made 2 payments and gotten the return of premium. Right. So it should be back on track by the end of the year.
Gotcha. All right.
On the other hand, though, if you look at that same page, the boiler insurance is over, and part of that is when we went on the renewal premium. We have some pretty aging equipment in the electric utility, and that was
so it catches on the age of the equipment now.
Yeah, we were insuring some things that because we still have them there, and because there is some liability associated with them, we didn't feel comfortable not insuring. But by the same token, it's getting to be, even for our insurer who's been with us for a long time, they're getting to be a little, making that a little dear. So hopefully, if we can commence with some of the shutting down and that sort of thing over the coming year, then maybe we can lower that next year and not insure some of those items.
Well, those were my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Just for someone who just picks this book up, I know you've covered it, but on page 17, the bar chart for general fund expenditures.
Yeah, among the transfers, and again, this is a kind of a built-in variance. Among the transfers is our transfer of debt service money for our debt service payment for Series 2012B. And again, that all gets paid in the first quarter of the year. So the debt service payments are never a pro rata thing. They're whenever the debt service payments come due, and sometimes they're once annual, twice annual. So that's the reason for that. If you look on page 21, the debt service transfer of $693,690 has already been made. It's 99% expended as of now because we have basically the one payment.
So just when you have miscellaneous or other in any of the report items, one always.
Right. And if you look again back on page 16, that's the reason that I put to the far right of all these bar charts, I put the total expenditures as compared to the percent of fiscal year elapsed, so that you can see, even though transfers is out of whack, it's in proportion to the rest of it. It doesn't take the entire, the total expenditures out. The other one that's of note in the general fund while we're on it is the police department pension expenditure is 100%. One of the things that we did 2 years ago, the police pension board did, was they decided to make their contribution every year entirely on October the 1st, which actually saved them money because of the actuarial assumption regarding a payment on the first of the year changed the requirement for the payment. So that was a conscious decision, and that's why the police pension is always 100% at the end of the first quarter.
And when we talk about we always talk about the general fund, but in the CAFRA, obviously, we have the police fund, which has been less underfunded than as we mentioned before.
Its funding percentage went down below, like into the low 70s at one point.
But it's
It's smaller.
It's always been better than general
It's always
fund.
been better.
A little bit.
It's always had a little more funding.
Well, and the other
Maybe
thing is it gets state premium tax funding. It's not entirely employer
they get
contributions.
they get the state funds.
It gets $400,000 a year from state premium taxes funding as well. So,
Right.
As for our new members, the first quarter is always very iffy because of the reasons that, and as the year goes on, and then when we do have variances, do you want to just briefly just mention budget amendments when we have them?
sure. We have the opportunity to amend the budget at any point during the year, and then we are required to make any amendments that we plan to before the end of November, following the end of the fiscal year, and we normally do that at least then as a true-up for the CAFR. A few years back, the Government Finance Officers Association and the GASB started requiring that in your audited financial statements, you show your original budget, your final budget, and your actuals. So no more were you allowed to just simply show your amended budget and then your actuals, which makes you look like a genius because, clearly by that point in time, you know exactly what you spent. You used to be able to amend your budget as far north as March and April of the following year. And so CAFRs were kind of hilarious because wow, these people are, they're good. It was like $1 off. And so now we have the dueling things of you have to show original and final, plus you have to adopt your amendment before the end of November when you don't really know everything that's going to happen. So we do one typically in October, November. If we really need to, we can do one mid-year. It's a lot of work, and to be frank with you, in the last few years, with the help of the Finance Commission and with some constant review of quarterlies as well as a little bit more realistic budgeting, we haven't really been in a place in the last couple of years where we've needed a mid-year amendment. There hasn't been anything far enough out of whack to concern us enough to amend it at mid-year. But certainly if something happened and we did, we could. But it's a lot of work to put one through. So usually last 2 years, just one in November.
And there's some flexibility in the budget. It doesn't mean that every line item has to be trued up, but it is the bottom lines that have to be. So there can be some shifting of the directors can make decisions to shift monies around if one of their expenditures is underrunning, another is overrunning, to be able to rebalance. So you don't get into micromanaging.
You do, and you make an excellent point. That's another one of the reasons that in the last few years we've had, I think, a lot better budgetary control and budgetary compliance to our original budgets, and that is we did institute what we call budget line item transfers. Each department head has to live within the bottom line of their department, but if you make a budget in July or August that has to last you all the way through September of the following year, and you can't possibly know everything that's going to happen to you. So what we've instituted is sort of a mindset where, let's say a computer blows up and you didn't expect it, you have to look within your total budget and see what else it is that you can not buy or live without or not do in order to transfer money to a line item so that you can buy that computer that you need. Sort of the way we all budget at home. And if something happens, you give up your vacation and fix your air conditioner kind of thing. And so our department heads have really taken a hold of that and have done an excellent job in the last few years. I know those of you have been here for a while in managing their bottom lines and making sure that wherever possible they find ways to cover unexpected items and live within their bottom line. So that's been helpful as well.
Any questions? Rate sufficiency?
Rate sufficiency. So I'm all about the good news today. What you have in front of you is the updated rate sufficiency for the first quarter of 14-15. And essentially what we're showing with actuals included for October, November, and December, as well as 9 months worth of our original projections, that we should end the year with a surplus of about $646,000, which on the surface sounds like a lot of money until you look and realize that it's really less than 1% of revenue. So it's a margin, but not a huge one. And as a result, what we're recommending is that we make no adjustments to the rates at this time, that we leave them where they are pending our conversation about the results of PRMG's rate study. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, you can take a vote or not. If you want to endorse our recommendation, just leave things alone until we hear from the rate
I
consultants.
just want to mention as well is that there's also, in addition to the optimization, there's a negotiation with OUC by our lawyer to see if we can amend those contracts as well. That would lead to rates. So there's a couple of different avenues that are approaching rate reductions. But with that, I'm sorry, you're looking for a recommendation?
If you would like to recommend that we continue to do this, I mean, without recommending a change, we've put this in front of council for next week that basically says the same thing, just we'd like to leave the status quo. The point you make about the renegotiation, though, I do want to make this really clear for everyone. This rate sufficiency is based on the status quo, the current budget, the current contracts, the expenses we're facing right now. It does not incorporate any potential savings or planned savings. This is all about what's on the ground and on the table right now in this electric utility, and we believe that our rates are good right now, sufficient to cover what we're dealing with at this point in time. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we maintain the system as it is, status quo today.
And I second it. All in favor?
All right.
thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, unless anyone has any other questions, I'm done.
It's a good time for Jim.
Mr. Connor, I prefaced the meeting with a discussion of the utilities meeting regarding the audit that I'd asked you to address. Right. And I just made the point that in summary, based upon the actions of the Utilities Commission, was to essentially put on hold until Mr. Old and the any actions or recommendations until the response back to the auditor by the agency to see what actions we're taking and what recommendations, as well as what comes out of the board's direction to the FMPA and what results from their two meetings. Also pointed out that the major issue, of course, that's been focused upon has been the hedging and the losses, and that the current top management was installed in 2008. essentially after most of those decisions were made by the former head. But again, wait until the results of those meetings. What Glenn pointed out was that just 35-member board trying to be the governance of the agency is very difficult and unwieldy, essentially when, as we discussed, you have Havana with 7,000 customers and Kissimmee with 100,000 and so forth. So that raised some issues. But my personal recommendation is that we just wait until the information comes down. One of the things I did say to the council that there was the issue about getting out of the contracts with OUC and FMPA. And they said that it's impossible for the City of Vero Beach to get out. And I said, that's not true. It is possible. And I asked the city council, I believe it was the mayor, said the price tag was $350 million. That is debatable, but it is that was evidently a number that was put forth, so that it gets back to that whole issue of the bonds and the debt that the customers of FMPA, their revenues are pledged for those bonds. And that's the intricacies of some of the stumbling blocks that we're facing. Just as a preface, but because I'd asked if you could give us, when we discussed the other day, how the PSC is going, the shores, as well as the audit, and any late-breaking news.
Okay, the FMPA audit, and I agree with you. I think it's important that we wait. There's going to be two very important meetings next week. Randy Ohl will attend both of them. One's the executive committee and the other's the full board committee. And he will be in attendance. He will be carrying a letter signed by the mayor where we're asking for the third-party oversight of the FMPA, and they look at not only the management but also the decision-making processes and try to get down to the fundamentals. The $350 million number was a number that John Igo's firm came up with using an engineer as an estimate. FMPA never gave us a number. FMPA's number was $54 million, if you recall. We went through that fiasco, and that was out the window. So that was a John Igo number that he gave as an estimate, and they did an analysis with the engineer that this is what the exposure would be and how would that work. So, so that's still a very arbitrary number. As you know, we were given a number of $42 million to exit all requirements as stranded cost. We don't necessarily agree with that number, but if you read the contract, they get to have a number that we have to pay. Now, we get reimbursed 90% of it. So the higher the number, they get 10% of whatever that number is. So it's sort of a weird contractual relationship that we have in that particular situation. In the OUC contract, on the other hand, as you know, Chef Wright is working with a fellow named Bill Hammond, who has done a lot of analysis of these type of power supply contracts, has a pretty deep history in it. And they're looking at three options, well, actually four options. One of the options is to stay where we are. Another option is what OUC put out the first time, which would be that we give up our portion of St. Lucie and we keep the contract for the same term that it is today, which is 2026. The other is shortening the term of the contract, and having that shorter term obviously has some cost involved in that. So they're looking at that one and what that would do. And the third is if we walked from the LUC contract. They are doing the analysis on that. There's very few people outside of folks in Vero Beach maybe, that don't think that they could hold us to the $50 million. We think there is a major challenge there if we try to get out from under it. So, but they're using that number in order to sort of put that forward as to doing the analysis if we did walk. So the key is that they are looking at all the options, and they will be making that report hopefully to the City Council next Tuesday, and sort of giving an overview. Now, there were meetings this morning, and there's going to be a meeting tomorrow, so the council's not getting any pre-warning about what is coming because we're still trying to put all that together. So the only thing we will be doing is giving information to the council and saying, here's information to digest, and then give everybody enough time to sort of weed through it and come back and look at the analysis as he's done. So those are the things that are taking place right now in the electric. Stand ready for any questions that you may have.
Do you anticipate any movement by the Shores in their lawsuit?
No, we
They
don't.
said they're going to, it's on abeyance till March 3rd, I think, or 2nd.
March 2nd, March the 3rd. We are gearing up is that they may, what do you call it in a lawsuit where you redefine it or whatever that is?
Amend it?
Amend. They may amend it, but I think the crux of the issue will remain the same. And, excuse me, and they've given no indication that they don't intend to do that. So in all the conversations, we can't meet the major demand, which is Florida Power and Light rates.
I've got a couple of points here on this audit. That there were 15 findings, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
The first three, and I don't know if that's they're made out as priority points or findings or the utmost, but the first three are their hedging activities. And they say they didn't follow industry practices with fuel hedging practices, investment in natural gas exploration and drilling, and interest rate swaps. Okay, which are they are they obligated to follow industry practices, or are they just making a finding based upon what they say are industry practices FMPA didn't follow? But are they obligated to do that?
They are not obligated because industry standards is a relative term and it's sort of hard to define. But what they're saying is the great majority of the public power agencies that fall into that category, that their hedging went outside of the scope of what the typical public power authority would do.
Have you reviewed our power contracts within the City of Vero Beach, the contracts that we have with FMPA? I mean, I know
Yes.
you reviewed them, but do they cover these practices? Natural gas exploration, drilling?
No, they don't. Our
So-
contracts, and I don't recall anything dealing with natural gas or hedging or anything like that. Ours is a power supply contract that says you will take and I think it's 38 megawatts, whatever the number is, and it will be based out of the pricing coming from Stanton 2, and St. Lucie, plus the overhead, which is the fixed cost that we do. And so it really has nothing to do with what they're doing. An example, we take issue with the fact on hedging for the Taylor swaps, as just using that as an example. We were out of the all requirements. It is our position that we should not stand in with any liability on that. And so, that'll be something else we may be going to court over, but it's still one of those. But those type of things, I think when we signed our contracts, were not ever anticipated. And if you look back at the history of FMPA, they started out as just sort of a co-op, and they would go out and get power supply contracts and then sell to their member cities. And it was never, in my opinion, because I was there when right as it was getting up and running, it was never intended to do these type of power generation in doing swaps or doing the gas futures. It just was not in their perspective. But that being said, obviously the the board of directors, and I presume the board of directors, based on what the auditor is saying, made decisions and instructed staff to carry those out. Because one thing that's not in there is any legal issues. I mean, this was all evidently above board and out on the table. But you also got to remember it only goes back, 3 years. So if there was even a more extensive, you just don't know what we'd find.
Okay, that was my question.
We are working with OUC just to make sure you all understand. OUC has been very good at working with us and trying to get these numbers out. They know we're looking at all those options, all three of the options. So there's been nothing that was hidden from them in our discussions.
Do you anticipate any movement on rates from OUC?
Yes, sir. The two proposals they've given us obviously have movement on rates going down. Now, we'll say that Chef's definition, how much is going down, and my definition of how much is going down, two different definitions, but it's heading in the right direction. And so I think if the city council wants to take any of those options, we could do it. And
Are they substantive?
yes. But you're giving stuff up. Now, you got to remember, for example, if you take that number one option, you're giving up your St. Lucie. But we have an engineering report that says that St. Lucie plant, for us, is underwater. So what you're giving up is questionable as to value. The other question is that if you still holding on to St. Lucie and you try to sell the facilities and it's underwater, it's just going to be a negative against the asset that you hold. So it's debatable, but again, that's some future discussion as to what the value of St. Lucie will be going forward. Obviously, Florida Power and Light thinks it's a very good asset because they've expanded it and added megawatts, and so it's there. And so and so you would be giving that up under the shortening the term. It's my understanding, based on the numbers that I've seen, there will be a reduction in our rates, not as much as if we went with option one, but it does bring it down. Now, I will say this is sort of out of the fairness of OUC, because they don't have to do that. But I think they have come to the conclusion that they would like to, resolve our issues, because it appears that from the day that this contract was signed with OUC is when we started fighting with OUC, and they would prefer not to do that, because the redacting stage, I wasn't here, but when they were talking about redacting and all this other stuff going on, and they're very sensitive to that, so that's where they're coming from.
And this, again, is separate from any incremental reductions that can be affected by implementing the study of optimization of current operations. So there's really a two-prong issue, then overlaid by what Cindy talked about earlier in terms of the rate structure. So it's really like a trifecta in terms of how rates are going to be impacted and how economies and so forth. So.
Yeah, and parallel with this, Tom Richards is working toward the trying to get the transmission study done as to making sure that we can get the power to make up. And we've identified some weaknesses. One of those is OUC probably could give us 32 megawatts. We need 50 going in. But along with that, we've taken Unit 3 offline. We probably will take Unit 4 offline very soon instead of spending any money on it. So we're looking at sort of downsizing the units, and then hopefully that will help us when we have to negotiate transmission going. But we are involved in that conversation with not only OUC but also FP&L. And FP&L would obviously like to sell us supplemental power. It's peaking is really what it is.
Jim, I haven't had a chance to review all the operating statements, but is there any indication that there's excess cash flow being accumulated within FMPA? In other words, if our debt service requirements are being covered by at 125, and I think ours are about 140, are they covering their debt service?
Glenn,
140, 160? I mean, is there excess? I mean, they've got investments sitting up there, you know.
I haven't really looked at it that closely. I mean, they deal in hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
And so, a fraction one way or the other means an awful lot of money.
But the bondholders,
Their financial statements are online. I mean, you can go to their website and get their
the bondholders,
CAFR.
like our bondholders, would be saying, look, we want a debt service coverage ratio of 1.25, 140, or something like that.
Their CAFR looks, and I've looked at it in a
Have you
cursory
looked at
fashion, it looks just like the city's CAFR. So there's notes to the financial statements. There's a whole section in the notes on debts and debt
I'll have to
service
look at it.
coverage. There's, they're out there. There's cash flow statements. The whole shooting match is there.
Well, I haven't
Did
spent
you
enough
see
time.
anything that sticks out to you as heavy on cash?
I did not really look at it. I'm busy trying to make a CAFR of my own, but I went out there today and found it.
But if they're sitting there with a fair amount of liquidity, apparently there's a fair amount of liquidity in the balance sheet someplace, and the bondholders must be well covered because they're getting bonds pretty easily.
Again, their balance sheet has to have the category unrestricted cash and investments.
Yeah, I'll have to look at it. You haven't had a chance at it either.
I just really haven't had a chance to look at it. I know it's available. If you just go FMPA CAFR, it'll take you to the page where all of them, including the
maybe we can try to
2014.
look at that and see
The
if there's
2014 is up there already.
Yeah, they'll have them pretty. Yeah.
And the other aspect of that is what the bond ratings are for bond agencies in conjunction,
Yeah.
and that's one of the key elements of
Sure,
what the ratings are.
Yeah.
I did, and this is where the reason I downloaded it. There's a fairly, as there has to be, a fairly extensive
Right.
section in the notes to the financial statements regarding long-term debt that covers each of the debt instruments and ratings and all the rest of it. It's right there in the
Maybe I get an
notes.
opportunity to look at it. I'd like to see it too.
Yeah, and I think their ratings were actually in the Auditor General's report, too, gave some
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
information on how they do the rating.
Any questions for Jim?
I apologize for being late, but I was down south, so I had to move on up here.
Well, thank you. With that, any members' matters?
Not mine. How did we resolve the 26th? What's our issue? What are we doing?
My note says to try to reschedule it on a day that works for you sooner rather than later. So I need to just go and I need to check some dates with with Jim Rizzo again.
Communicate with all of us then?
I will. I'll
hate
work
to do
with
that
Sherry.
to the guys, so we need to push it back to help the other guys. Push it back a week or so. I mean, whatever works for them.
Well,
26th, 25th through Saturday.
Not a problem. I will get some dates from the consultant, and then I'll have Sherry float some dates to the committee, and we'll make sure we pick one that works for you because this was your meeting, so I want you to be there.
Right.
Glenn, on that topic of, you were talking about the makeup of the pension board and sort of incestuous, I guess. But the fact of the matter is the pension board cannot add any benefits to the pension plan at all. The only thing we do is handle the money that comes in and check with Prudential as to where those investments go. So there's no way that the pension board can fluctuate and change anything other than possibly investment strategy. And fortunately, Cindy and I have been going to most of the police pension board meetings, and you can sort of see where their strategies are and how they've done a much better rate of return than we have. So, and now we're sort of getting back in line with that, especially with the real estate issues. So we are moving in that direction.
Well, you can help them with real estate investment.
No, I'm not doing that.
They're not just for the record, in case anyone thinks we're buying real estate. They're real estate investment trusts.
We still got that $5 million.
Investments.
I think the pension fund still got the $5 million in loans, short-term loans.
Yeah.
Right. I looked at that.
I know you've had a conversation with them about it, and that doesn't make you
did.
happy. But.
Okay.
With that, a motion for adjourn?
I'll move. Motion for adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.